This is a Force for Good production. My name is Alistair McConaughey. The big news this week was the High Court's decision in London that Article 50, the mechanism by which the United Kingdom gives notice to the EU that it intends to leave, that Article 50 requires, in its view, that the British Parliament has to make the decision rather than the Prime Minister going ahead with that on her own. Now, the Supreme Court is going to have the final say on that matter beginning on the 5th of December. And it may or it may not support the High Court's decision. But we at A Force for Good believe that that decision was correct, both democratically and constitutionally. Now, democratically, it's about checks and balances, among other things. In that regard, one of our supporters sent us an email recently, and in it, our colleague said, quote, "This decision of the court is not a setback, but is proof of the wonderful British division of powers. Evidence that Britons can never be slaves to tyrants, with checks and balances on power as we have seen operating. An independent Scotland will not have checks and balances like these, and that's one reason why I back Great Britain." That's well said. And it's not just about checks and balances, it's also about accommodation and resolution. What do we mean by that? We read the phrase in a very good article which we found on a site by the Unionist Party. Its full name is A Better Britain Unionist Party. You can read it at abbup.org. And this article, which is entitled "Why We Must Oppose a Second Referendum on Scottish Separation," is lamenting the extent to which referendums nowadays seem to be replacing our representative parliamentary democracy. And it says, quote, "The entirely unconstitutional referendum revolution has resulted in a tension in our democracy. It pits two mandates against each other, a referendum result against our elected representatives." And it talks about how this is a polarising form of democracy. The very nature of referendums causes this polarisation, it says. Instead of the wealth of opinion and nuance found in party manifestos at a general election, instead very complex issues are reduced to two stark and often inadequate choices on a ballot paper. It goes on, and we agree, it says, "It is only through our representative parliamentary democracy that we can find either accommodation or resolution." The very nature of referendums tends against both of these things. Accommodation and resolution. What that's saying is that involving Parliament in a decision like this Article 50 decision helps to represent and articulate the concerns of everyone who voted at the referendum, regardless of what side they voted for. So it's about accommodating everyone in Britain, not just the majority that voted leave, but also the substantial minority that did not. And it's giving everyone a voice in a public process which is intended to reach some sort of democratic resolution. And that's important for social stability. So we also said constitutionally. Now, constitutionally, we believe that this sets a very good precedent for our case here as Unionists in Scotland trying to hold the United Kingdom together. What it does, a ruling such as this, is it helps to hold back or restrain the power of the Prime Minister to do what she wants. So imagine if she chose to hold a second referendum. Then we need Parliament to be able to step in and say, no, that's a bad idea. Because look what happened back for the referendum that was held in 2014. Back then, David Cameron decided on his own, unilaterally, using the powers that were vested in him, called the royal prerogative powers. Using that power, he decided just to go ahead and call a referendum. He did not involve Parliament in putting forward any bill or passing any act on the matter. So in effect, everybody in England, Wales and Northern Ireland was excluded from that decision. If you believed in the United Kingdom, you didn't even have a say, not even through your elected representatives in Parliament. So that surely cannot be correct when the consequences of such a decision could result in the destruction of the United Kingdom. Surely that sort of thing cannot just be done through royal prerogative powers vested in one individual. And this point was made again by the Unionist Party in another article which we found called A Wake-Up Call to Unionism. And this is an especially good website, abbup.org. Do check out these remarkable articles on here. And it talks about the process by which David Cameron did this. And it says, quote, "The entire referendum process was entirely ad hoc and arbitrary for the simple reason that there is no constitutional mechanism for breaking up the country. The very foundational document that created the UK is, of course, the Act of Union." abbup.org. So we don't want that sort of thing to happen again. We want there to be as many barriers as possible in the way of holding a second referendum on breaking up Britain. And we certainly want all of the United Kingdom to be involved in that decision, because if all of the United Kingdom is involved, then at least there might be a chance that such a catastrophic referendum did not go ahead. We want to throw up as many potential barriers as possible, and this Article 50 ruling could be used as precedent to bring such a matter to the attention of the greater, wider, collective British Parliament. Now, of course, getting the MPs in the British Parliament at the moment to argue against a second referendum for Scotland might be a forlorn hope. But in the long term, we want to get all our MPs, wherever in the UK they are from, thinking in this wider pan-UK, pro-British way, and realising, we want them to be able to realise that each of them is responsible for holding the United Kingdom together. And whether Britain breaks up is not just a matter for the SNP MPs to constantly whinge and moan and shout about. It's for all the MPs in Britain to have a say and to stand up to defend the integrity of the United Kingdom and to do nothing which might imperil it. So that's the kind of attitude that we're trying to encourage in all the MPs, wherever in the UK they come from. And as we say, this Article 50 ruling could be used as a precedent to demand that the situation is taken before the British Parliament, in the hope that the British Parliament will vote against such a decision. Now we're going to speak about the nature of referendums. What are they? Because their nature is clearly being misunderstood by large elements of the political class on all sides of political opinion. Referendums are not authoritative. That is to say, they are not necessarily to be obeyed. They are only advisory. Now, That may come as a shock to many people listening, but it is the truth. Let's go back to first principles. What is a referendum? A referendum is essentially a giant survey, a giant opinion poll, which is intended to guide members of Parliament in their behaviour. They are powerful guides to behaviour for the MPs, but they should not be considered anything more than that. They do not constitute authority in and of themselves. And this is the big point that many people and many MPs do not understand. The reason for this is that in the United Kingdom, authority is singular. That is to say, it can only be located in one place at one time. Authority is usually located in the British Parliament, and it's usually located, vested in the members of Parliament themselves. Hence the expression, Parliament is sovereign. However, at a general election, the MPs resign, and that authority is passed back to the people to make their decision. We can call that democratic sovereignty, or the sovereignty of the people, where the people are sovereign for a time. When Parliament is elected, the sovereignty of the people is passed back to Parliament, and Parliament becomes sovereign again for a time. However, during a referendum, the MPs do not resign. Parliament is not dissolved. Parliament remains sovereign. Authority remains vested in Parliament and in the bodies of the MPs. So authority continues to be vested in Parliament, in each MP, who, so long as he or she remains in their position, must always have the final say, even if that means he or she going against the majority opinion which was expressed in that referendum. Now, usually, of course, they will go along with the majority opinion. But if they don't, then there is likely to be a general election where their authority is passed back to the people. And at that point, we discover the extent to which the people who voted at the referendum are prepared to vote for candidates who represent their position on that particular referendum matter. So from that explanation, we see that the idea that referendums should somehow be made legally binding on Parliament is not a correct opinion. It misunderstands the nature of authority in the United Kingdom. Referendums do not possess authority. Rather, they express points of view. Usually two opposing points of view on a particular matter at a particular time. And the majority opinion which is expressed on that particular matter at that particular time is not authoritative. It does not have to be obeyed. Rather, it is advisory. And the politicians in whom authority continues to be vested may or may not choose to be influenced by it. And quite rightly so. How can Why should a giant opinion poll held on one day, expressing only the views of people on that day, be considered a definitive expression of the will of the people for all time? Put that way, the idea is absurd. Referendums should be intended to guide our representatives in Parliament, but the result is not and should never be binding upon Parliament. It is ultimately the MPs who should have the final say over whether or not to follow the majority opinion on this matter. And that's important, especially for us here in Scotland, as we continue to battle those who would try to break up the United Kingdom through the referendum process. Imagine we lost a second referendum on separation. Do we really want our MPs to just accept that, to just roll over and go along with it? Because that happens to be the majority point of view, perhaps a very slim majority point of view on that particular matter on that particular day. Is that meant to settle everything forevermore? Do you accept that we should break up the United Kingdom on such a flimsy basis? We don't. Well, thank you very much, folks, for watching. That was quite heavy, but it had to be said, and we are the people here at A Force for Good who have the ability to say that, because lots of people may think that, they may know it, but they don't actually have the means by which to say it. So we've got the means by which to say it, we've got the time, we've got the energy, and we've got the ability to do it. So if you support that effort of ours, please do consider donating to us. You can click in the show more box down below. There's a PayPal link, and there's also a link to the donate page on our website, aforceforgood.org.uk. Now, 3 weeks ago we put out an appeal for funds for a dedicated video editing computer. The good news is that process is now underway, and we will have one shortly. When we do, we'll put a photograph of it up in our video of that week. Check out our Facebook and our Twitter accounts. We post on them daily. Also consider joining our patreon.com account, where you can donate per video. And please subscribe by clicking the red bar along the top there, or the red button to the left of the video, or the red button just inside the video there. Our first goal is 250 subscribers, but we're aiming for thousands of subscribers, because that's the way that we can really push these videos around YouTube. So please do subscribe. My name is Alistair McConaughey, and this has been a Force for Good production.